The morning started like any other day on planet. Kepler 442b. David rolled out of his narrow bed and walked to the small kitchen area of his research station. He'd been living alone on this distant planet for 8 months now, studying the strange plants that grew here. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the quiet space with its familiar sound. Outside his dome-shaped home, purple sky stretched endlessly above rolling hills covered in silver grass. 2 small suns hung low on the horizon, casting everything in a soft orange glow. David had grown used to the alien landscape. But some mornings he still missed Earth's blue skies and green trees. His communication device beeped loudly, interrupting his morning routine. David frowned as he read the message on the screen. His monthly supply delivery was coming 3 weeks early. It was unusual. In all his time here, deliveries had always arrived exactly on schedule. Route changes due to shipping delays, the message explained. Courier arriving in 2 hours, instead of scheduled date next month. David shrugged and finished his coffee. At least he wouldn't run out of supplies this time. His coffee reserves were getting dangerously low, and he'd been rationing his last. Few packets for weeks. Living alone on a distant planet meant careful planning with everything. 2 hours later, David heard the familiar whoosh of engines above his station. Through the transparent dome ceiling, he watched a sleek silver ship descend gracefully toward the landing pad. The ship was beautiful, with smooth curves and no visible joints or seams. It looked more like a work of art than a cargo vessel. Engines wound down, and David walked outside to meet his courier. He'd been receiving monthly deliveries for almost a year now, always from the same pilot. Her name was Kira, and she belonged to a species called the Velthari. They looked somewhat like humans, but with pale blue skin that sometimes showed hints of purple or violet. Their eyes were larger than human eyes, and they had small decorative markings on their faces that glowed softly. Today, something seemed different about Kira as she stepped down from her ship. Usually, she was all business, quick, efficient, and professional. Would unload his supplies, have him sign the delivery papers, and be gone within an hour. But today, she moved more slowly, and her usual composed expression seemed strained. "Oh, David," she said, her voice carrying that musical quality all Velthari possessed. "I apologize for the early arrival. Changes in shipping routes, you understand." "Problem at all," David replied, noting how her skin seemed more flushed than usual. The violet undertones in her pale blue complexion appeared more pronounced. "Actually, I'm grateful. I was down to my last few packets of coffee." Kira smiled at that, a genuine expression that transformed her entire face. Humans and their coffee addiction. I've never understood it. They began unloading the cargo together, working side by side in comfortable silence. David noticed that Kira seemed to be taking her time today, double-checking inventory lists and reorganizing containers that looked perfectly fine to him. Normally, she worked with swift efficiency, eager to move on to her next delivery stop. "Is everything okay?" David asked as they finished stacking the last of the supply crates. "You seem... different today." Kira paused, one hand resting on a supply container. "Different how? I don't know. More relaxed, maybe? Usually you're in such a hurry to leave." She looked away, toward the purple horizon where the twin suns were beginning to set. "My next route takes me to the outer colonies. It'll be nearly 6 months before I can return here instead of my usual monthly visits." David felt an unexpected pang of disappointment at this news. Over the months, Kira had become his only regular contact with the outside universe. Their brief conversations during deliveries were the highlight of his otherwise solitary existence. 6 months, he repeated. "That's a long time, yes, it is." Kira's bioluminescent facial markings pulsed gently. Something David had learned happened when she was thinking deeply about something. The outer colonies are expanding rapidly. They need more frequent supply runs. An idea formed in David's mind, one that surprised him with its boldness. "Would you like to stay for dinner? I mean, if you're not in a rush to leave tonight, I could actually cook something decent for once, instead of eating another ration pack alone." Kira's large eyes widened slightly. In all their months of professional interaction, he'd never invited her to stay longer than necessary. The invitation hung in the air between them, and David immediately worried he'd overstepped some boundary. Yes, I would like that, Kira said finally. My ship's navigation systems could use a rest cycle anyway. Space travel is more efficient after a proper shutdown period. David smiled, relieved and surprisingly happy. Great, I actually have some real ingredients this time, not just the processed stuff. I've been growing vegetables in the hydroponics bay. They walked back to David's living quarters together, and he noticed that Kira seemed to be paying more attention to her surroundings than usual. She looked at his small garden with genuine interest, asked questions about his research, and even laughed at his jokes about the challenges of growing Earth. Vegetables and alien soil. The evening stretched longer than either of them had expected. David prepared the best meal he could manage with his limited resources: fresh vegetables from his garden, protein supplements seasoned with herbs he'd learned to cultivate, and even a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. Seemed fascinated by human food preparation, watching intently as David cooked. Velthari meals are usually much simpler, she explained. We consume mostly nutrient-rich liquids and soft foods. This cooking process is quite elaborate. It's one of the things I miss most about Earth, David admitted, stirring the vegetables in the pan, sharing meals with other people. Food always tastes better when you're not eating alone. As they ate, their conversation flowed more naturally than it ever had before. Kira told him about the strange worlds she'd visited on her Courier routes, and David shared stories about his botanical discoveries on Kepler-4 for 2b. He learned that she'd been working Courier routes for 5 years, and that she genuinely enjoyed the solitude of space travel. Don't you get lonely? David asked. All that time alone in your ship? Kira considered the question carefully. Sometimes, but I've grown used to my own company. Although, she paused, her markings pulsing again, I found myself looking forward to these stops more than I probably should. There was something in her tone that made David's heart beat a little faster. He'd been attracted to Kira from their first meeting, but he'd never imagined she might feel any similar connection. Humans in Velthari didn't often form personal relationships, at least not that he'd heard of. After dinner, they moved to David's small observation area, where large windows offered a view of the alien landscape under the star-filled sky. Kira seemed reluctant to end the evening, finding excuses to linger, asking more questions about his research, commenting on the beauty of the night sky, even offering to help clean up the dinner dishes. I should probably return to my ship, she said eventually, though she made no move to leave. Early departure tomorrow. Of course, David agreed, though he felt the same reluctance to see her go. Thank you for staying. This was ... really nice. I didn't realize how much I needed the company. Kira looked at him with those large, expressive eyes. Neither did I. She stood to leave, but as she reached the door, she swayed slightly, one hand reaching out to steady herself against the wall. David was beside her immediately, concerned. Are you all right? Just tired, Kira said, but her voice sounded strained. The long flight and then the meal. Not used to such rich food. David noticed that her skin felt warmer than usual when he touched her arm to steady her. Maybe you should rest here tonight instead of returning to your ship. I have a spare sleeping area in the lab. Kira seemed to consider this conflict playing. Across her features, I shouldn't impose ... It's no imposition. Besides, if you're not feeling well, it's probably safer to stay put. Finally, she nodded. Perhaps you're right, just for tonight. David set up a comfortable sleeping area for her in his laboratory, giving her privacy while staying close enough to help if she needed anything. As he settled into his own bed, he found himself thinking about the evening they'd shared and wondering why the thought of not seeing Kira for 6 months felt so difficult to accept. In the lab, Kira lay awake, staring at the ceiling and trying to understand the strange sensations coursing through her body. She felt warm, restless, and oddly sensitive to every sound David made in the next room. Something was happening to her, something she didn't quite understand. But she was grateful not to be alone in her ship tonight. Outside, the alien wind whistled softly around the research station, and both David and Kira drifted off to sleep, unaware that the next few days would change both their lives forever. David woke up the next morning to strange sounds coming from his laboratory. At first he thought maybe some equipment had malfunctioned during the night, but as he listened more carefully, he realized the sounds were coming from Kira. He knocked gently on the lab door. "Kira, are you okay in there?" "I'm fine," came her muffled reply, but her voice sounded different, strained. "Just having some trouble with my equipment." David frowned. That didn't sound right. He'd heard Kira's ship systems running perfectly yesterday. "Can I help with anything?" There was a long pause before she answered. "No, thank you. I'll be leaving soon." But when David looked outside, Kira's ship was still sitting on the landing pad, exactly where she'd left it the night before. The engines weren't even warming up. Something was definitely wrong. An hour passed, then two. David tried to focus on his plant research, but he kept glancing toward the lab where Kira was staying. Finally, he couldn't stand it anymore. He walked to the lab door and knocked again. "Kira, I'm coming in. I'm worried about you." When he opened the door, he found her sitting on the floor, leaning against the wall. Her usually pale blue skin had taken on a deeper violet hue, and she looked flushed, like she had a fever. Her breathing was shallow and quick. "You're sick," David said, rushing to her side. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I'm not sick," Kira protested weakly. "This is ... different. It's complicated." David knelt beside her and gently touched her forehead. Her skin was burning hot. "You have a fever. Need to get your temperature down." "Human remedies won't work," Kira said, but she didn't pull away from his touch. In fact, she seemed to lean into it slightly. "My body is just ... going through." "Something going through what?" David asked, genuinely concerned. "Kira, you're clearly not well. Let me help you." Kira closed her eyes, as if she was fighting some internal battle. "It's a biological process that my species experiences. Usually it happens on a predictable schedule, but sometimes," she trailed off. "Sometimes what?" "Sometimes it can be triggered by other factors." She opened her eyes and looked at him with an expression that was both vulnerable and embarrassed. "Emotional factors." David didn't fully understand what she meant, but he could see that whatever was happening too, her was getting worse. Her hands were trembling, and the bioluminescent markings on her face were pulsing erratically. "Okay, I don't need to understand everything right now," he said gently. "But I can see you're suffering. What can I do to help?" "You can't," Kira said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I need to leave. I need to get to a medical facility on one of the colonies." As if the universe was responding to her words, David's weather monitoring system started beeping loudly. He checked the display, and his heart sank. A massive storm system was moving across their region of the planet. "The kind of storm that grounded all aircraft for days." "Kira," he said slowly, "we might have a problem." She followed his gaze to the weather display, and her face went pale beneath the violet flush. "How long?" "The storm will hit in about 6 hours. After that, nothing flies for at least 3 days, maybe more." Kira stared at the weather data in silence. David could practically see her mind racing, calculating options, searching for alternatives. But there weren't any. They were stuck together. And whatever was happening to her was only going to get worse. "This is bad," she whispered. "Why? What exactly is wrong?" David asked. "I can't help you if I don't understand what's happening." Kira was quiet for a long moment. Then she took a deep breath and looked at him directly. "My species goes through reproductive cycles, usually every few years, and usually predictable, but they can be triggered early by emotional bonding." David felt his cheeks warm as he began to understand. The process is ... intense and prolonged, and it requires ... double quotes. She stopped, unable to continue. "What does it require?" "Physical closeness with the individual who triggered it." Kira's markings were pulsing rapidly now. "David, I think my feelings for you have caused this to happen." The laboratory fell silent, except for the sound of the approaching storm outside. David processed what she'd told him, trying to wrap his mind around the implications. Kira had feelings for him, strong enough feelings to trigger a biological response. "How long does it last?" he asked quietly. 3 to 5 days, typically. But without proper ... management, It can be dangerous. The fever gets worse. The body goes into distress. David looked at her flushed skin and labored breathing. What kind of distress? Dehydration? Exhaustion? In extreme cases? Organ failure? Kira's voice was barely above a whisper. That's why I need to leave. There are medical facilities that can help manage the symptoms artificially, but you can't leave. It's not with this storm coming. Both knew what that meant. Kira would have to endure this biological crisis here, in David's small research station, with only him to help her through it. I'm sorry, Kira said, tears forming in her large eyes. I didn't even realize what I was feeling until it was too late. David surprised himself with his next words. Don't apologize for having feelings. I've had feelings for you too. I've looked forward to your visits more than anything else in my life out here. Kira stared at him in shock. You have every month. When I knew you were coming, it was like Christmas morning. I would plan conversations, think of things to show. You hope maybe this time you'd stay a little longer. David reached out and took her hand gently. I just never imagined you might feel the same way. I do, Kira admitted. More than I should. More than is practical for someone in my profession. The storm warning system beeped again, more urgently this time. Through the laboratory windows, they could see dark clouds gathering on the horizon. The wind was picking up, making the research station creak and sway slightly. So what do we do? David asked. I don't know, Kira said honestly. This has never happened to me before. Usually this process occurs with someone of my own species, in controlled circumstances. But staying close to me helps with the symptoms? Kira nodded reluctantly. Your presence seems to stabilize the worst effects. But David, you don't understand what you'd be committing to. This isn't just about sitting beside me for a few days. The biological drives are ... intense. David squeezed her hand gently. We'll figure it out as we go. Right now, you're sick, and there's a storm coming. Everything else can wait. As if summoned by his words, the first drops of rain began hitting the dome above them. Within minutes, it had escalated to a torrential downpour. The wind howled around the research station, and lightning illuminated the dark sky in brilliant flashes. Looks like we're committed now, David said, trying to keep his tone light despite the gravity of their situation. Kira managed a weak smile. I suppose we are. David helped her to the more comfortable seating area in the main living space. Being closer to him did seem to help. Her breathing became less labored, and some of the tension left her body. But he could see that this was just the beginning. Whatever was happening to Kira was going to get more intense before it got better. Outside, the storm raged with increasing fury, trapping them together in the small research station. David found himself wondering what the next few days would bring and whether their relationship would survive, whatever lay ahead. David. Kira's voice was soft, almost lost in the sound of the storm. Yeah, thank you, for not making me face this alone. He looked at her flushed face and bright eyes, feeling a protectiveness he'd never experienced before.
You'll never have
to face anything alone again. I promise. As the storm intensified outside, David prepared himself for whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing only that he cared about Kira more than he'd ever cared about anyone, and that he'd do whatever it took to help her through this crisis. The storm outside grew stronger as the night went on. David had never seen weather this intense on Kepler-4 to be. The wind howled around their small research station, and rain hammered against the dome so hard it sounded like stones being thrown. Inside, Kira's condition was getting worse. David had set up a comfortable area for her in the main living space with soft cushions and blankets. But every few hours, she would start shivering uncontrollably, even though her skin felt burning hot to the touch. I need to understand this. Better, David said, pulling up his research computer. There has to be information about your species' biology in the scientific databases. David, you don't need to... Kira began, but her voice was weak. Yes, I do, he said firmly. If I'm going to help you through this, I need to know what we're dealing with. He spent the next hour reading everything he could find about Velthari. Biology. What he learned both fascinated and worried him. The reproductive cycles were complex, involving not just physical changes, but intense emotional and psychological responses. Most importantly, he learned that these cycles could indeed be dangerous if not properly managed. It says here that isolation during a cycle can cause severe depression and physical breakdown, David said, looking up from his screen. But companionship from the bonded individual can actually help stabilize everything. Kira nodded weakly. That's why I was trying to leave. I didn't want to put you in this position. What position? Taking care of someone I care about? David moved closer to her. Kira, you're not putting me in any position I don't want to be in. As he sat beside her, David noticed that her breathing did become more regular. The frantic pulsing of her facial markings slowed to a steadier rhythm. His presence really was helping. Tell me what you need, he said gently. I don't know, Kira admitted. This has never happened to me before. Usually these cycles are planned, prepared for. There are traditional ways of managing them within my culture. Well, we'll have to figure out our own way, the next few hours. Tested both of them. Kira's condition fluctuated wildly. Sometimes she seemed almost normal, able to talk and even smile. Other times, she was overwhelmed by waves of discomfort that left her curled up and shaking. David learned that staying close helped. But it was more than just being in the same room. When Kira was having a particularly difficult episode, gentle touch seemed to calm her. A hand on her shoulder, stroking her hair, or simply holding her hand made a visible difference. I'm sorry, Kira whispered during one of her calmer moments. This must be so strange for you. It's not strange, David said honestly. It's just ... new. Different from anything I've experienced. But Kira, you don't need to apologize for being who you are. Most humans would be frightened by this, by me. David considered that. Maybe some would. But I'm not most humans. And you're not just any Velthari. You're Kira. You're the person who's brought light to my lonely months on this planet. You're kind, intelligent, funny, and beautiful. A biological process doesn't change any of that. Kira's eyes filled with tears at his words. You really mean that? Every word. As the storm continued outside, David found himself learning more about Kira than he'd ever imagined possible. She told him about her childhood on the Velthari homeworld, her decision to become a courier, her love of traveling between stars. In return, he shared stories about his life on Earth, his passion for botany, and his dreams of discovering new forms of plant life. I used to think I was meant to be alone, David said as they sat together, watching lightning flash through the storm clouds. I chose this assignment because I thought isolation would help me focus on my work. And now I realize I was just hiding from connection, from the possibility of caring about someone and having them care back. Kira leaned against his shoulder, and David felt a contentment he'd never experienced before. Despite the circumstances, despite the storm, despite the uncertainty of their situation, this felt right. David, Kira said softly, there's something else you should know about this process. What's that? It creates a permanent bond. Once it's complete, we'll always be connected in some way. I'll always know when you're in distress, and you'll be able to sense my emotional state too. David thought about this. That doesn't sound like a bad thing. It means we can never really be apart again. Not for long periods. It would be painful for both of us. Are you asking if I'm okay with that? Kira nodded, looking vulnerable and hopeful at the same time. David took her hands in his. Kira, I've been alone for most of my adult life. Careers and assignments that kept me isolated because I thought that's what I wanted. But these past months, getting to know you, have been the happiest I've ever been. The idea of being connected to you, of never having to say goodbye again, it sounds like the best thing that could happen to me. Even if it means changing your entire life, your career, your plans. Plans change. Careers can be adapted. But finding someone you truly care about, that's rare. It's precious. Kira smiled. The first genuine, unreserved smile he'd seen from her since this crisis began. I love you, David. I know it's complicated, and I know the timing is terrible, but I needed you to know that. I love you too, David replied without hesitation. The timing isn't terrible. It's perfect. We're here, together, with nowhere else to be, and nothing else to worry about except taking care of each other, as if responding to their declarations. The storm outside began to calm slightly. The wind was still strong, but the constant hammering of rain had eased to a steady drumming. "The storm's passing," David observed. "The worst of it anyway," Kira agreed. "But we still have at least 2 more days before it's safe to fly." "Good," David said, surprising them both. "I'm not ready for this to end yet." Kira curled up beside him, her head on his chest. For the first time since her crisis began, she seemed truly peaceful. David wrapped his arms around her, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him. "What happens next?" Kira asked quietly. "I don't know," David admitted. "But whatever it is, we'll figure it out together." Outside, the storm continued its slow passage across the planet. Inside their small research station, David and Kira held each other close, no longer fighting against their feelings or the situation that had brought them together. Instead, they embraced it, and each other. Ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, the crisis that had seemed so frightening just hours ago had transformed into something beautiful, the beginning of a love story that would change both their lives forever. Yes. They drifted off to sleep in each other's arms. Both David and Kira felt a peace they'd never known before, and a hope for a future they never could have imagined. The storm outside was passing, but the connection between them was just beginning to grow stronger. David woke up to the sound of silence. Now, through 3 days of constant storm noise, the sudden quiet felt strange and almost unsettling. He looked down at Kira, who was still sleeping peacefully in his arms. Her skin had returned to its normal pale blue color, and her breathing was steady and calm. The crisis seemed to be over, but David knew that meant new challenges were about to begin. As if summoned by his thoughts, his communication device started beeping loudly. David carefully moved away from Kira, trying not to wake her, and checked the incoming message. Heart sank as he read it. "Courier 847 Kira, respond immediately. You have missed 2 scheduled check-ins. Recovery team dispatched to your last known location. Arrival estimated in 18 hours. David stared at the message, feeling panic rise in his chest. 18 hours. That wasn't much time to figure out how to explain what had happened, or what they were going to do about their relationship. "What is it?" Kira's voice was soft but alert. She'd woken up and was watching him with concerned eyes. "Your company," David said, showing her the message. "They're sending a recovery team." Kira sat up quickly, reading the message over his shoulder. "Oh no, I completely forgot about my check-ins." "This is bad, David. Very bad." "What happens if they find out what really happened here?" "I don't know. Interspecies relationships aren't forbidden, but they complicated. There's paperwork, evaluations, possible reassignment." Kira ran her hands through her hair, clearly stressed. "I could lose my courier license." David felt his stomach drop. "And if you lose your license, I'd have to find other work. It's probably on a planet somewhere in a regular job. It's no more traveling between the stars." The thought of Kira being trapped on one planet, unable to do the work she loved, made David feel sick. "There has to be something we can do. I need to contact them," Kira said, reaching for his communication device. "Maybe. I can buy us some time." She quickly composed a message explaining that her ship had suffered minor mechanical problems during the storm and that she was working on repairs. It wasn't entirely untrue. They had been dealing with a crisis, just not a mechanical one. "Might give us a few more hours," Kira said after sending the message. "But David, when they arrive, they're going to ask questions, and they'll be able to tell that something has changed." "What do you mean?" "The bonding process leaves, ... markers, chemical changes that other Velthari can detect. My supervisor will know immediately what happened." David paced around the small living area, thinking hard. What if we told them the truth? That we care about each other and want to be together? It's not that simple. There are protocols for interspecies relationships. Medical examinations, psychological evaluations, approval processes that can take months. Kira looked defeated. And during all that time, I'd be grounded. No flying, no courier work. There has to be another way. Before Kira could respond, David's communication device beeped again. This time, it was a message for him, from his research supervisor on Earth. Dr. Chen, we have an urgent request from the Galactic Botanical Survey. They need a xenobotanist for a multi-planet research expedition. The assignment would involve traveling with supply ships to catalog plant life on newly discovered worlds. Interested? Response needed within 24 hours? David stared at the message, hardly believing what he was reading. A traveling research position? It was like the universe was offering them a solution to their problem. Kira, look at this, he said. Showing her the message, her eyes widened as she read. A traveling research position? David, that could work. If you were officially assigned to travel with Courier ships, we could be together, David finished. Legally, professionally, without having to break any rules. For the first time since waking up, Kira smiled. It's possible. Interspecies. Teams are becoming more common for deep space work. If your supervisors approve the assignment, and if my company agrees to carry a research specialist, then we wouldn't have to hide anything, David said, excitement building. We could be honest about our relationship because it would actually be beneficial for both our careers. They spent the next few hours crafting their strategy. David would respond to his supervisor's message, expressing strong interest in the traveling research position. Kira would contact her company and explain that she had been approached about carrying a research specialist on her routes. We have to be careful about the timing, Kira warned. If my supervisor arrives before we have approval for this arrangement, it could complicate everything. Then we'd better work fast. David quickly composed a detailed response to his supervisor, explaining his enthusiasm for the position and his qualifications for multi-planet botanical research. He emphasized his successful work on Kepler-4 and his ability to work independently in challenging conditions. Meanwhile, Kira reached out to her dispatcher, explaining that she had been contacted about a potential research partnership that could add value to her delivery routes. She was careful to present it as a professional opportunity rather than a personal request. Now we wait, Kira said after they'd sent their messages, and Hope David added. The next few hours felt like the longest of David's life. Every time his communication device made a sound, his heart jumped. Finally, just as the sun was setting, they received the response they'd been hoping for. David's supervisor was very interested in the traveling research position. The Galactic Botanical Survey had been looking for someone with David's specific qualifications for months. They were prepared to approve the assignment immediately if David could confirm his availability. Kira's company. Response came an hour later. They were intrigued by the possibility of adding research services to their courier routes. Several clients had expressed interest in botanical surveys of their new colonies. If the research specialist came with proper credentials and insurance, they would be willing to discuss a trial arrangement. It's working, Kira said, hardly daring to believe it. David, I think it's actually working. We're not there yet, David cautioned, but he was smiling too. We still have to convince your supervisor when he arrives tomorrow. As if on cue, David's communication device beeped with an incoming transmission. The recovery team was requesting permission to land in 12 hours. 12 hours, Kira said. Do you think that's enough time to get all the approvals we need? It has to be, David said firmly, because the alternative is losing each other, and that's not happening. They worked through the night, exchanging messages with their respective supervisors, filling out forms, and preparing their case for why their professional partnership would benefit everyone involved. By dawn, they had preliminary approval from both organizations for a trial period. 1 month, David said, reading the final message from his supervisor. They're giving us 1 month to prove that this arrangement works. 1 month to show that we can be professional partners as well as ... Quotes. Kira paused. As well as people who love each other, David finished. We can do this, Kira. We can make this work. As the recovery ship appeared on the horizon, David and Kira stood together outside the research station, holding hands and facing their future with hope and determination. They had found love in the most unexpected circumstances, and now they were fighting to build a life together among the stars. The next few hours would determine everything.
Oh.
But for the first time since this all began, David felt confident that they were going to be okay. More than okay, they were going to be happy. The recovery ship landed with a soft thud on the makeshift landing pad next to Kira's courier vessel. David felt his heart pounding as he watched 3 figures emerge from the sleek craft. 2 were Valtheri, like Kira, and 1 appeared to be human. "That's my supervisor, Commander Thane," Kira said quietly, pointing to the taller of the 2 Valthari. "The other one is probably a medical officer. I don't recognize the human." David squeezed her hand. "Remember, we're professional colleagues who happen to develop feelings for each other. Nothing inappropriate happened." "Right," Kira nodded. Though she still looked nervous, Commander Thane approached them with the efficient stride. David had come to associate with Valthari authority figures. His facial markings were more elaborate than Kira's, indicating his higher rank, and his expression was unreadable. "Courier Kira," he said formally. "We received your messages about mechanical difficulties. Our scans show your ship is in perfect working condition." "Yes, sir," Kira replied. "The problems were resolved yesterday evening." The commander's large eyes shifted to David, then back to Kira. David could almost see him processing information, noting their close proximity. The way they stood together, the subtle changes in Kira's scent that would tell another Valthari exactly what had happened. "I see," Commander Thane said slowly. "And you are Dr. Chen, the research specialist we've been hearing about?" "Correct," David said, stepping forward to shake the commander's hand. "I'm very grateful for this opportunity to expand my research beyond a single planet." The human from the recovery team approached them with a friendly smile. "Dr. Chen, I'm Captain Rodriguez from the Interspecies Cooperation Bureau. We've been reviewing your application for the traveling research position already?" David asked, surprised. "When we heard about the potential partnership between a courier service and a xenobotanist, we expedited the review process," Captain Rodriguez explained. "This kind of cooperation between species is exactly what we're trying to encourage, Commander." Thane was studying Kira carefully. Kira, please step aside with me for a moment. I need to conduct a standard wellness check." David watched nervously as Kira walked a short distance away with her supervisor. He couldn't hear their conversation, but he could see Kira answering questions, and Commander Thane's increasingly surprised expressions. "Don't worry," Captain Rodriguez said quietly. Commander Thane is actually quite progressive when it comes to interspecies cooperation. "If your partnership is genuine and beneficial to both parties, he'll support it." "It's genuine," David said firmly. "Kira is. She's the most amazing person I've ever met. I want to spend my life with her, but I also want to do it in a way that honors both our careers." After what felt like an eternity, Kira and Commander Thane returned. The commander's expression had shifted from stern suspicion to something that looked almost like approval. "Dr. Chen," Commander Thane said, "Courier Kira has explained the circumstances of your relationship. While the timing was ... unexpected ... it appears that your feelings for each other are genuine and long-standing." "They are," Sir David confirmed. "Furthermore, your research credentials are impressive, and the potential for botanical surveys along courier routes could be quite valuable to our clients." The commander paused, his markings pulsing thoughtfully. "However, there will be conditions." "What kind of conditions?" Kira asked. "You will both be on probation for 6 months. During this time, you must demonstrate that your personal relationship enhances rather than interferes with your professional duties. You will also be required to attend quarterly evaluations with both human and Valtheri counselors." David and Kira exchanged glances. "We can accept those conditions," David said. "Excellent," Captain Rodriguez added. "From the human side, we're prepared to offer Dr. Chen a full commission as a traveling research specialist. His work on Kepler 442b has been outstanding, and we believe this new arrangement will benefit botanical research throughout the sector. And from our side," Commander Thane continued, "Courier Kira will be reassigned to the extended research routes. These are longer missions to newly established colonies that could benefit from both supply delivery and scientific services." "Longer missions?" Kira asked. 3 to 6 months at a time instead of the quick delivery runs you've been doing," the commander explained. "More time for thorough research and more opportunity for the kind of partnership you're proposing. David felt a surge of excitement. Months at a time, traveling together, visiting new worlds, pursuing the work they both loved while building their relationship. It sounded like a dream come true. "There's one more thing," Commander Thane said, and his tone became more personal. "Kira, your biological bonding with Dr. Chen means you'll be much happier and more stable with a permanent partner. The medical officer confirms that your health readings are better than they've been in years." Kira blushed, her markings pulsing. With embarrassment and happiness, "Thank you, sir," David asked. "Your first mission departs in 2 weeks," Captain Rodriguez said, handing them both official-looking data tablets. "You'll be delivering supplies and conducting botanical surveys on 3 newly terraformed worlds in the Andromeda sector." The officials returned to their ship and departed. David and Kira stood alone on the landing pad, holding their new assignment orders and hardly believing how well everything had worked out. "We did it," Kira said, laughing with relief and joy. "We actually did it." "We're going to be traveling together," David said, pulling her into his arms. "Officially, professionally, and completely legally." "I love you," Kira said, looking up at him with bright, happy eyes. "I love you too," David replied, kissing her gently. 2 weeks later, they stood together on the bridge of Kira's newly upgraded Courier ship, now equipped with expanded laboratory space for David's research. They were approaching their first destination, a planet called New Eden that had been terraformed just 5 years ago. "Ready for your first official mission as my research partner?" Kira asked, running through the landing sequence. "Ready for my first official mission as your everything partner," David corrected, making her laugh. As their ship descended through New Eden's atmosphere, David marveled at how much his life had changed. 6 months ago, he'd been a lonely researcher on a distant planet, convinced that isolation was what he needed. Now he was traveling through space with the woman he loved, pursuing exciting research, and looking forward to a future full of adventure and discovery. "What are you thinking about?" Kira asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "Just how lucky I am," David said honestly. "A few months ago, if someone had told me that an unexpected delivery would change my entire life, I never would have believed." "Them best delivery I ever made," Kira said with a smile. "Best delivery you ever will make," David agreed. Their ship touched down gently on New Eden's surface, and David looked out at the alien landscape waiting to be explored. Somewhere out there were new plants to discover, new ecosystems to study, and new adventures to share with Kira. "Ready to start our new life?" Kira asked, taking his hand. "I've been ready since the moment you walked into mine," David replied. Together, they stepped out into their future hand in hand among the stars,